edition of Working for You.
Mr. Osmond Petty, and the National Security Advisor, retired Major General Stuart Saunders, who will be discussing the national security strategy for St Kitts and Nevis. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Right, so we have the national security strategy. Now, how did this come about? How did the national security strategy come about? Because it is the outcome of something. Some form of discussion had to take place and so on.
Thank you, Leslie. Let me thank you and ZZ for having us. I will give an overview, background information, and then I'll ask the General to elaborate in some depth on the strategy itself. And I'll come back in later with some other comments. But since 2015, we've had documents from the police and elsewhere about national security. We had the 6-point plan, we had the police 4-year strategic plan, and all of these focused to a large extent on crime and fighting crime. In 2017, somewhere around there, Major General Saunders was engaged as National Security Advisor. I think it was around August. And shortly after, in discussion with me and so on, he presented to Cabinet, through the Honourable Prime Minister, a national security architecture which envisaged how national security, the threats to national security and what had to be dealt with, including crime, but it was very wide-ranging. One of the first things, though, we realized that we had to do was to engage the public, and we formulated a committee led by Mr. Dwyasif, an attorney, and about 9 or 10 other private and public sector persons. And they had consultation with national security agencies, government departments, public and private sector interest groups, town hall meetings, etc. And somewhere around the end of 2018 and early 2019, they submitted a report. Now, the report did not specifically speak to all of the aspects of the national security architecture, but it outlined some of the concerns that people had, that agencies had. And so General Saunders and I would put it together in a format which we then presented again to Cabinet. Unfortunately, 2020 came and we had COVID, and everything went on the back burner until somewhere around September we were able to revive it again and got Cabinet's approval to proceed. So here we are. It's been I would say even a 3-year process of recommendations, discussions on the way forward. What I would want to say as I close this point is to say that it is not just something to say this is how we're going to fight crime. It is to say what are the threats to national security in the Federation, and for that matter the region, and how do we deal with it. And the approach that this document has taken is that it needs all of government to address national security, not just the police and the defense force, but all of the government. Because as General Saunders would outline, national security, and as you have mentioned, national security involves much more than just the gangs, although that is a very important aspect of it. So I'll ask General Saunders now to speak in more detail, with your permission, to the document.
Certainly. General Saunders, of course, you know the objectives, the
Yes.
rationale, and the main pillars of the national security strategy, the main ingredients, if you want to put it that way.
Okay, fine. The objective of the national security strategy really is clear to determine, as Mr. Petty outlined, the threats that the nation faces, and inform the citizens and provide for the relevant actions that are necessary to obviously deal with these particular threats and maintain a safe, secure, stable environment. So the document we're discussing today really, as Mr. Petty said, is the result of an extensive study, discussions, etc., etc. And we have come up with a number of areas that obviously will need to be addressed going forward. One of the most important aspects of it deals with the threat assessment. And I would like to point out from the very onset that the threat assessment is not something that has been pulled out of a book, right? It is as a result of the interaction between people, organizations, agencies, ministries, and other departments, right? And these have been compiled. And this is what we have basically come up with. So the current threats to the Federation of St Kitts and Nevis, and to an extent, in fact, the wider Caribbean, concerns themselves with illegal arms and ammunition trafficking, illegal drug trade, organized crime, transnational organized crime, corruption, financial crimes, which also include money laundering, cybercrime, which we know is very much topical right now, human trafficking, and of course we have had our fair share of those experiences, especially over the last 2 years or so in the Federation, to include illegal migration, terrorism, which is an ever-present threat, health security, which you quite correctly elaborated on, especially where the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned, which is still very much impacting us now. Food and water security, which we tend not to think about much, but this is one of our realities. And of course, over the years, we have become rather accustomed to natural disasters and to an extent man-made disasters. In fact, we're approaching the next hurricane season in a couple of months, and not really climate change. So those are the threat areas basically that are the more important ones that came out of this set of deliberations with the National Security Strategy Formulation Committee. So essentially, what the document sets about to do as far as executing these tasks is concerned, it outlines the steps that the government intends to take to make sure that a proper national security architecture is in place and it will deal with these things, for argument's sake, in a particular manner. It intends to obviously take the profit out of crime. That's the first and one of the most essential areas that we're dealing with. Right? Eradicating corruption in the public and private sectors is of course extremely important. There's a need to equip law enforcement agencies and provide them with the necessary legislation to conduct their myriad of tasks. The government intends to incorporate the private security guard companies in the national security architecture to lend more eyes and ears on the ground as far as ensuring that we have safe and secure communities is concerned. Improve our border security, land by land, air and sea. Develop obviously and maintain a proper intelligence structure. Develop counter-terrorism resilience. The main economic earner right here in St Kitts and Nevis is really the tourism industry. Tourism industries worldwide have been the targets of quite a number of terrorist organizations. We have to protect assets like that. Fully utilize the policing and social intervention tools and mechanisms in dealing with crime. It is something which Mr. Petty will elaborate on. Strengthening the criminal justice system, eradicating human trafficking and smuggling. Of course, we must develop and maintain a certain degree of natural and man-made disaster resilience, health security. I suppose you might want to go into that further later on, but the fact of the matter is that it is a reality which we have to deal with. And it's not just that when COVID goes by that there will be nothing in the future. We have to plan for the future, especially where pandemics are concerned. We have to take actions to negate the impact of climate change, and obviously try to develop alternative energy sources, improving food and water security, continuously engage our regional and international partners in order to enhance or to cover those gaps which we ourselves will not be able to undertake, as a nation. And obviously, we must think about those people who are incarcerated and the need for them to be rehabilitated and come back out as positive products or contributors to our society. Obviously, there are regional commitments as well as international commitments which we must continue to honor, and in specifically as far as improving upon or playing our part where certain regional crime strategies are concerned. That's of very much great importance. So that in a nutshell covers the objectives. If you want me to go on all right. The document itself, as I said before, caters to a particular approach. Right, and it's a document which is open to the public. The public can go through it. So I'll take my time and go through certain areas just to make sure that we highlight certain things. Let us look at a number of areas, just for argument's sake. We talk about taking the profit out of crime. At the heart of most, if not all, criminal enterprise is a desire to achieve illegal profits. Right. The theme transcends all aspects of national, regional, and international crime activities, and the Federation is no exception where this is concerned. So we are committed, the government is committed as an entity to find the ways and means of addressing this particular issue, right, taking the profit out of crime. So it will engage the at-risk youths, the marginalized, and the disenfranchised. It will also seek to address victims of violence. It will see that people are obviously provided with the relevant or needed legislation in order to enact all of these things. And obviously it has to tackle all those critical financial crimes, cyber crimes, the crimes that are mostly indulging as far as making money is concerned, illegal trafficking, in especially the hard drugs, right? Lottery scamming, extortion, and those other areas. Let us look at strengthening the criminal justice system. Now, in strengthening the criminal justice system, it's not just a case of looking at the courts and all that sort of thing. Those are well-known and well-documented requirements. But there are other aspects to this part of the threat scenario. For argument's sake, in many cases, there have been instances of the abuse of authority on the part of law enforcement agencies across the Caribbean, right? And these abuses parallel what's happening in other areas of the world, whether it's United States, United Kingdom, Canada, or wherever. So it is nothing new that's coming on the slate. However, we have to develop the oversight mechanisms, right, that will see to law enforcement agencies conducting themselves in a proper manner, right, for a start. We have to also ensure that all law enforcement agencies are properly trained and capable of acting in accordance with human rights provisions and the laws of the Federation. Right? It's a question of policing by consent, right? Policing for the people of the nation. So in going forward, those are some of the areas, outside of the norm when we're talking about strengthening the criminal justice system, sure, that we will have to look at. Mr. Petty will deal with one of the other things that the government recognizes, the whole question of social interventions, right, and how that will be rolled out across the federations, because that is another part again of strengthening the criminal justice system, right? The social interventions, the meaningful and targeted social interventions that will be put in place to address the at-risk youth, right? So in future we don't have the problem that we have now. You build throughout your communities people who are more law-abiding and positive thinking and contributors to society than anything else.
Right. The Major General, you spoke about taking the profit out of crime.
Yeah.
Could you give me a specific example of taking the profit out of crime?
Okay, let us look at the whole question, Lesroy, of extortion. Simple and straightforward thing, right? You basically are saying to you, a business. I'm saying to you as a criminal. I'm saying to you as a businessman. If you don't pay me a certain amount of money, I'm going to ensure that you will lose your business. Your business will be burnt down and that sort of thing. So I am making money as a criminal, right, for doing nothing at all except passing on a threat to you, right? This is something that all law enforcement agencies have to come to grip with. This is something that the society, in the whole of government and whole of society approach, has to come to grip with. Things like these need to be reported so that you do not lose your well-earned and hard-earned dollar as far as your business venture is concerned to criminality, right? So these things have to be prevented, whether by legislation, whether by far more effective policing, far more cooperation between the citizens of the country and the police force or law enforcement agencies, so you have nothing like that. And so people can go about their business lawfully, right, and in turn cause the economy to grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, I know that is something that is extremely prevalent in Jamaican society. The extortion. It is not really prevalent here in St Kitts and Nevis, but I do know in Jamaican society it is. But nonetheless, it is still a threat.
Yes, it is.
A lot of what you outlined as well, Major General, has to do with corruption.
Yes.
Corruption is at the heart of most of these threats and crimes, and the stamping out of corruption requires, of course, you spoke about legislation, but it just doesn't require legislation. It means that legislation has to be enforced, and first it has to be operationalized, and then it has to be enforced. Like you spoke about eradicating corruption in public and private sectors. I know there's certain legislation that we have brought to Parliament, integrity in public life legislation and so on, that has to be operationalized and so on, if corruption is really to be rooted out in the public sector. So it's not just legislation, but the legislation must be operationalized, and there must be some teeth
it must
to
have
it.
Teeth,
Otherwise the corruption will continue.
Precisely. And I'm agreeing with you wholeheartedly. And not only must that be part and parcel of eradicating corruption, but also the investigatory powers of law enforcement entities has got to be improved in order to rid society of that, right? And also there's a responsibility across the Caribbean, where there's more evidence of that across the Caribbean than here. There's a responsibility of even politicians divorcing themselves from relationships with gangs, criminals, and that sort of thing, because that adds to the corruption of public officials.
Yeah, I know in Jamaica you have the garrison politics, which you have the nexus between the criminals and the dons and the politicians. We don't really have that sort of a politics here.
No, but what you have to do is to guard against it. So you've got to make sure that it does not come in at all. It does not occur in at all. Yes. So that those are some of the areas. And it's a document which I hope that everyone will have a chance to read through and understand themselves, as time goes by.
Right. Mr. Petty, the Major General touched on the whole area of the social aspect. For example, in order to reduce threat to national security, one has to pay attention to the social health of any society, how people are socialized and, at a very young age, so that they can grow up with some sort of virtues and morals and all of that sort of a thing. And we cannot really overlook that in terms of the institutions of socialization, the family being the first one. How is that being, operationalized?
Before I respond directly, I want to read to you the vision statement for the strategy. It says that St Kitts and Nevis is a nation that puts God and country above self. We all exist in a peaceful, safe, secure, and stable environment A place where citizens, residents and visitors can live, study, work and do business. A federation that values its people, system of government and consistently seeks improvements for all. Explorers as a pre-charge diversion program, which simply means that a child steals a book. Instead of locking him up and carrying him before the court, why not give him to explorers and let the inspector and her people deal with him? Or even if he did something which created a charge, so there's post-charge diversion, it's still, instead of locking him up, working with the youth and community development people and so on, whatever, there's an alternative to dealing with it rather than giving him a prison so he gets a criminal record early. We also talk about rehabilitation in the prison, and we're talking about vigorously looking for reintegrating those who are leaving the prison. All of these are things which are actually being vigorously pursued now, and this strategy requires all government agencies that are involved to, whether it's the PS of Social Development or the Child Justice Board or somebody who are involved, to work together, the Youth Department, to work together. And the world here is together, because it's not just a national security police thing to hold up the person. It is once you hold the New Horizon home. The question is, what happens when a child leaves the New Horizon? I think in the future, near future, that's a discussion which has to take place. They're 18 years old, what happens to them? And so on. And so, the idea behind this document is to say to the country, to say to government agencies and non-government agencies that national security is not just the defense force or the police, although they're very important in enforcing laws. But national security is everybody coming together. We'll talk a little later about what's the next step, because we have already met with the heads of national security agencies, so a little later we'll elaborate what is to happen.
Right, so
Okay.
I suppose that you have, started on the right footing by bringing the document to the public on this program, because of course the various institutions and the stakeholders would have to be familiar with this document. But not only to be familiar with it, but at the end of the day, you are only familiar with it in order to operationalize it, to put certain things in place. I mean, we've started already. Mr. Petty, you spoke about the explorers, youth groups, you spoke about the new thrust in the prison system in terms of rehabilitation. Because, of course, nobody should really go to prison and come back out worse than how they went inside there. Otherwise, that is how you have the whole cycle continuing of recidivism and all of that. So that is, and even with the peace initiative, really the focus should really be on the rehabilitation. There's a lot of talk out there, a lot of focus that people have been getting money and all of this kind of a thing, but that is not the focus of it. The focus is really should be on the changing of hearts and minds, because if you have money involved and that conversion does not take place with heart and minds, we are doing something in vain.
Well, to take on from where you just left off, Lazaro, the Alternative Lifestyle Pathway Program has in fact created, to a great degree, changes in mindsets, and changes in mindsets towards a more positive outcomes and contributions to society. There is no doubt about that if one should look at its track record, for argument's sake, from the 13th of March 2019 to date. Right? And as Mr. Petty quite correctly pointed out, we hope that we will be able to continue this particular program in the interest of our at-risk, marginalized and disenfranchised youths. But it is not something that we are saying is going to be there ad infinitum. Right? We hope that once the mindsets have changed to a certain standard, then there will be no refueling of a particular negative element coming up below that. right? And so society itself will end up being properly transformed, right? So that's essentially what this document is trying to achieve in one of its areas.
And we have seen,
Yes.
Major Stewart, the reduction in homicides, for example.
Yes, yes.
You've seen the reduction over the few years in homicides.
Yes.
But at the very same time, you have the reduction in homicides, but you need to have some sort of the Greek word metanoia, the change of heart and mind.
Yes.
that is really taking
Yes.
taking place. And ever so often as well, sporadically, we see the ugliness raising its head. The other day we had a double murder
Yes.
of two very young persons. Some of the time you have, so sometimes you see it raising its head, and that is what you don't want to re-emerge.
Right.
Really.
Right. And essentially what I'd say, to you, the public in general, is that what we are doing is not something that is going to achieve all its goals and objectives overnight. Right? Just as the National Security Strategy outlines, right? Crime is something that evolves and continues to evolve. We in law enforcement, governments who have their responsibilities, as you outlined at the beginning of the program, have to ensure that they not only keep abreast but are more ahead of the evolution of crime, right, as far as their policies and strategies are concerned. And this is what this is all about. What we are discussing here today is by no means set in stone, right? It has to evolve, as I said before. And perhaps, I don't know what the time span is going to be at the end of the day, but the government, the people have to decide that, look, perhaps we need to review this every 3 or 5 years, to
Yes.
make sure that it remains a proactive strategy as opposed to a reactive one.
And people becoming more
Yes.
sophisticated
Yes,
in
yes.
terms of the crime, the
Yes,
organized
yes.
crime. They're using technology.
Precisely.
Just the other day we heard about this cybersecurity breach
Yes, yes.
at the
yes.
National Bank that
Yes.
raised issues really
Yes.
of security. And how people really felt, and people, especially when it comes to their money and so on, and people start to take out their money and start to question certain things. People want to know that they are secure, and that where they invest their money and invest their time and resources and all of that sort of a thing, that it is secure, and that falls under the whole umbrella of national security.
Right, right.
Mr. Petty.
Yeah, I was going to say in the next 2 or 3 weeks, well, maybe by next week, we're going to start some related engagements in terms of not just all of government, but all of community. In other words, to do some of what we're doing, this deviant behaviors thing, we really need to mobilize communities and get communities involved in what's happening,
Yes.
so that we are engaging or have engaged a psychologist who is coming in, and we're going to try to put together a program to have discussions about some of the same thing, but to mobilize communities, because communities right now are dormant. Everybody, something happens, they look into the police. How many community councils do you know operating? Very few. And if they're operating, they're not really doing anything to do about crime prevention. They may sweep a yard or something, or put up a clean a lawn or something. But in terms of pulling the youth together, not much of that is happening in communities. And so we need to get back to that kind of vigorous activity. Very quickly, I want to say the way forward here, and I think the general can come on afterwards. I want to say this is a strategy. This is not the solution, because out of this strategy will come a number of policy documents, revised legislation, a crime reduction plan, for example, which builds on to things like Explorers and the Peace Initiative and anything else that people, the church and them have some good programs.
Yes.
Anything that is there, let us put together to come up with a strategy, but an organized strategy, so we all know who is doing what and what is the outcome of this. Okay. We have asked so far all our national security agencies to take this strategy and go back to the heads of the departments. And I think maybe General, you have a copy.
Yes. Well,
take us
just
quickly through.
Right. Just to explain what they have been doing, or how this the procedures work. We have met, as Mr. Petty said, with the agencies within the Ministry of National Security, and there are the other aspects of the government and other institutions that we will have to meet with in the near future to go through with them exactly what is required in the approach, right, to actualizing this particular document. Let me just use an example. Well, first of all, I'm going to use the example of transnational organized crime. But to remind you, as I said earlier, all the threats that I spoke about earlier have a tier rating system, right, from tier 1 through to tier 4, which is an internationally recognized tier rating system, right, which basically prioritizes the threat realities that we face. So transnational organized crime falls in the tier 1 threats, which is something that we are experiencing daily in the Federation and across the region. And it includes arms, ammunition trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking and smuggling, money laundering, cybercrime, that sort of a scenario. Now, what the ministry departments and agencies are required to do is as follows. The police force takes the lead in the matter of transnational organized crime, right? And they are required to meet with the other aspects of this particular what should I call it now? Well, formulate a multidisciplinary task force. Essentially, that's what they are going to be doing. Formulating a multidisciplinary task force, right, or constituting that to deal with this aspect of things. The reason you need the many different facets involved in this sort of a task force is simply this. Any entity of crime that you take today at the levels that we are talking about does not involve only one offense, right? So if you are dealing with illegal drugs or illegal arms and ammunition, importation is one aspect of it. Illegal possession is another aspect of it. Trafficking in arms and ammunition, and there's a whole gamut of things. Right?
The use of it.
Use of it. Did you bring it in illegally? Who is connected to it? So right then and there, you're seeing a number of other agencies that have responsibility in a number of areas. For argument's sake, we're talking about customs, we're talking about immigration, we're talking about policing, and even the Ministry of Finance. Right. So all of these entities are involved in prosecuting a crime, right, that is simply called illegal arms and ammunition trafficking. Right? So you need that multidisciplinary approach in order to deal effectively, right, with that particular crime. So the police, as I said before, takes the lead in that, and it will have supporting agencies now, right, like Ministry of Finance, Customs, right, Immigration, the Defense Force, right? All these entities will be supporting entities, right, in that multidisciplinary task force to prosecute these types of crimes. So that is the approach that we speak about when we talk about a multifaceted approach, a whole of government approach, or a whole of society approach, right? Because the society needs to know that this is how we're going to deal with these things, and the society needs to know that this is the part that you have to play in assisting us, assisting the standard agencies and ministries, departments, etc., in dealing with this for our own collective safety, security, and stability.
Yes, and Mr. Petty did mention the buy-in, basically from the communities and from the public, because that is important, because over the years we have developed a sort of a mentality of see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, sort of a thing. And also what has crept in, some of what, because the Caribbean, we're so small, and things, we're influenced from other Caribbean countries and so on, in form of a dead culture. And that you're not supposed to, you see something, you don't report it. And what I have been seeing among the young people, Mr. Petty, for example, is that there has been a desensitization of really, you know, when something wrong is happening. You find you have two people involved in a fight, instead people try to involve in part in the fight. They take out their cell phones and they start to film what is happening and they're laughing, and then when you look, this has gone viral in society and it becomes something to people to look at and sort of entertainment, when really and truly what you have is an aberration of behavior.
I want to follow on with what Major General said about the process. I want to take health security just for the pandemic. Corona has forced a certain set of things. They force all kind of laws and protocols and blah blah blah. What this strategy is saying, let us learn from that and anticipate
Exactly.
what may happen again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because with the COVID-19, we've had to change laws and protocols in progress to counter. This is saying, look, let's look at what really is needed to, just in case there's something else. The role of NEMA, for instance, has emerged as prior to this. NEMA was just something we hear about when Hurricane came. Now NEMA is a lead agency, apart from health, in dealing with COVID.
Yes.
And so the entire section in here about man-made disasters and security, water security and all of those, forces NEMA to look at itself and say, look, if we're going to take on all these responsibilities, what changes should be made in NEMA? Maybe we need a different structuring of NEMA and so on. So this is why range, and this is what I'm saying, this is not a solution per se. This is a strategy for identifying the risks and the threats, and to requiring all of the agencies to sit down and have a look at their own institutions, their own agency structure, and come up with solutions. I have a passion for social interventions. That is what maybe my background in terms of working with children in school and all kind of things. So a lot of my thing has to do with social interventions and things. But there are other aspects in here which perhaps other people would want to lead in. And the time is now right for all of the government agencies. The Labour Department has a role to play, I suppose, in the alternative lifestyle thing, but I don't know if it's really well fleshed out. It will have a role to play in our social intervention policies, in reintegration of people from the prison. And so it's time that we look at these kind of things and not just talk, because I am not too much in favor of talk shows and people just calling in and talking, to be honest. I am interested in people who are actually sitting down and working and putting together documents and so on that can do something, an action.
Yeah,
So,
Mr. Petty, that is basically how it is. But of course, you know, as the Major General mentioned, this whole strategy is one that is multifaceted. It takes into consideration a number of institutions and organizations and ministries and departments and all of that sort of a thing. And one of the questions that one has to ask is, who is going to guard the guard? And what do I mean by that? How do you prevent these institutions, these organizations, these departments and so on, who is really supposed to be putting this, implementing it and making sure that it functions, from being corrupt? Because at the end of the day, there must be some instrument to judge, for example, fairness, accountability, and all of that sort of a thing. Otherwise, you're sometimes just really spinning top in mud. I very much know of of countries and so on. They have a lot of stuff in place and so on, but there is no teeth. The corruption is still rampant, and sometimes it is at the highest levels of the politics and so on.
But I could let the general speak a bit, but I don't know if we're going to ever have the full solution. But this document speaks of something which some countries have used, like national security, vetting and that type of thing, which we have not really embraced in St Kitts. This is polygraphs and that type of thing.
Because there must be some sort of a review at the end of the day, some sort of an organizational review. Is it working? Is it not working? What more needs to be done? So in other words, they need to evaluate themselves.
Yeah, well,
is the police force working?
Yeah, let me speak to that. As I had said earlier on, the ministry departments and the agencies, having read this document, and we're now going to go into the organization review stage. In the organization review stage, what they're really looking at is how best they can carry out the mandate of the government. The government has already stated that you are going to need to have oversight mechanisms, right? The strategy is not something that is set in stone, so it's going to be reviewed over time. There'll be measurements, there'll be evaluations, etc. All that is stated in the document. So how best are you going to carry out these things now? You've got to look at yourself as an organization or an entity, see what resources you have, right? And secondly, see if those resources match what the government wants you to do. Can they do it? If they can't do it, obviously you have a gap in your resources. That gap is something that has got to be recorded, right? Because at the end of the day, what you're going to present to government when your review finishes, right, is a structure that says, I can do this based upon what you have mandated me to do, or I am lacking in these resources and therefore will need assistance, right? And if where their resources are concerned, we have got to be realistic, right? You're not going to get everything overnight. So we have got to make a recommendation to government that I recommend that these resources should come forward in the next 2, 3, or 5 years, right? But the bottom line is simply this. Based upon where I am now, this is what I can do as far as your instructions, the government instructions or mandate is concerned, right? And in all of that, the mechanism, the oversight mechanism which I spoke about, Mr. Petty alluded to, right? Those recommendations have got to come back up, right? And those recommendations have got to be signed off on by government and implemented, right? For argument's sake, I mentioned we're oversight of police, military, and those all these bodies have got to be put in place. You mentioned the integrity
in public life, legislation,
and all these things, right? So that is part and parcel. Well, as an example of what we're talking about, you need oversight mechanisms, as you quite correctly said, to make sure that everything functions the way they are meant to function. There's no corruption in the system, right? And the system serves the people. Right, and so that's how it is structured. So the organizational reviews have started. As I said before, Mr. Petty said, it started with the meeting of the departments and agencies within the Ministry of National Security, because it is the Ministry of National Security that has to take the lead responsibility for the strategy.
Right? Yes. And sometimes to what we have with these kinds of things is that we have a sort of a top-down approach.
Yes.
Which sometimes doesn't really work. Sometimes it has to be a bottom-up approach.
Yes.
And Mr. Petty speaks about working with the people, starting with them at a very young age, and all that sort of a thing. That is a bottom-up approach, rather than the top-down approach. Because the top-down approach sometimes creates friction more than anything else. And additionally, if we don't root out the corruption, then we are going to find that you're going to have the country, the government, will have to be dishing out more and more resources and more money in trying to fight crime.
And you're quite right. And this
So
is what this is geared to prevent.
Right.
Prevent that sort of thing. You know, and
Money that can go into our health system and our education system.
Yeah. And this is exactly why we're emphasizing this afternoon that, look, this is not a one-man show. Right? This is a whole of government, a whole of society effort. Everybody needs to come on board to make this a reality.
Right. You know, Mr. Petty, when the prison was built, it wasn't built. I hear, you know, the Commissioner of Corrections, Terence James, speaking about that all the time. 1840.
Yeah.
It was only built to accommodate a few people.
Exactly.
And over time, look at what has happened. And now we are talking about we have to build a new correctional facility.
Yes.
Are they going to get bigger and bigger? Or what? We need to do something.
Well, I think,
And that is why this is important.
I think the new, well, just to digress, the new correctional facility is not going to be designed for more prisoners.
No.
It's going to be designed for, well, there's a realistic number you're looking
Yeah.
for.
A more humane
It's
setting.
going to be for more human and for more programs
Mhm.
of rehabilitation, which could be costly, but certainly,
Yeah.
if as this is suggesting that we want to reintegrate people,
Yes.
then the program in the prison must seek to reintegrate them
Yep.
and rehabilitate them and so on. So it's not about the number of prisoners you're going to accommodate, but it is about preventing people from going in there first. And as far as I'm concerned, to me, that is where I would like to focus. But once they get in there, then we have to have something to,
Yes.
to work with them and help them to come out better than they went in. So,
Mhm.
a new prison is costly if he's going to do all of that, but the costs are probably not in cells,
Yeah.
but in other things. I would want to just, as we begin to open up a bit, to say that there is no magic formula being presented here. This is, as I said, and I want to place on record my appreciation for the work of Dwight Stefan Angel, who actually went around to people and asked them what they think. It doesn't come out here that this is their thing, but some of the things that have been recommended here
Yeah.
pulled on what they said people said. And based on the general experience, my own experience, and anybody who contributed the experience, we have formulated a document,
Yes.
which we say these are the kind of things we want to emphasize. But it's not a magic formula. There will always be something else you could add.
That is correct. It's not set in stone.
Not set in stone,
definitely not,
okay?
definitely not.
And but it gives clear direction as to where we would want to go and where we are going, and what are some of the things that we would like to see coming out of this, such as a national gang reduction policy, for example,
Right.
taking into consideration all the good things that has happened, looking at all the bad things that have happened, and looking at what's happening now. Let us see how we can build a policy to, first of all, deal with the problem as we have it right now, and secondly, ensure that we don't have that problem again.
Yeah.
We talk about transnational crime. You're quite right. We don't have the garrisons and all that kind of thing, but we were heading that way,
Yes.
to be honest, and we don't want to get that way, and therefore programs need to be put in place to prevent recruitment. I am very passionate about preventing recruitment. That's why I am so passionate about explorers, because we want to make sure that the people who do recruitment don't get at the children. You know?
Yeah, and you cannot have a nexus between politics and criminality.
No.
You cannot have politicians in the hands of criminals. Otherwise, that is a deadly mix.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they will continually hold you to ransom, and you don't want that. Mr. Petty, we have seen in the police force and so on, you know, that it seems like there is a divided love. Let's put it that way. You have officers, yes, their main job, yes, is the thing, but I see so many of them all over the place, and they're working here and they're working there, and they're doing security and so on. Does that affect really
Well,
the
I am not going to comment on that because I don't know, but it could affect.
And is that something that, no, not that you want to comment, but is that something that the strategy is addressing? That's what I want to know.
The strategy has a section in here about police extra
Tangential
duty
issues.
and
Yes.
tangential issues.
Yeah.
On the tangential issue,
Yeah.
police. First of all, we have to look at the economics of it. And we have to look at, whether it's the burnout of it, and what kind of jobs and that kind of thing. So, but I have to say that there are laws on the books which can deal with it. I don't think the laws are being implemented, or the regulations. So it may not necessarily be needed for new regulations. Is to implement what is there. But certainly, in our difficult economic times, when we say you can't have or you shouldn't have an extra job, we must be able to say to them, well, I have a family to feed and I need to make sure I have enough money to feed them. So what are the benefits for me being in the police force?
But not only working as security at establishments, but for example, setting up your own security company.
Well, that is, but I'm saying that is already there, is not allowed. So those are things which are already is a matter of enforcing those regulations.
I think Mr. Petty is quite right, and I think that the strategy does in fact provide an avenue for the conversation to start, right? With the aim, obviously, of arriving at resolution.
Right. Okay, we are going to go to the phone lines and to hear what people have to say. The numbers to call, the international number is 1718-577-2916. That's the international number. And the local number is 465-2555. 465-2555. We await your calls. Right. No, Major Stewart, the acquisition of additional resources, because you have a strategy, and as Mr. Petty outlined, it is only a strategy. Certain things have to come with it, legislation. Certain things have to be formed, for example, and so on. We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Right, Mr. Petty, I'm very glad to hear you say that the Explorers Club seeks to actively involve parents in significant ways in decisions and so on. Because I believe that parental involvement, parental influence, parental training of children is not only critical, it is of paramount importance. I believe that parents' deliberate, conscious training of children is the preventive of crime and violence more so than any other factor or variable. I believe the solution to issues of crime, Mr. Petty, and the Major Saunders, the solution to issues of crime and violence is not so much in attending to those who are currently involved in that kind of sociopathic behavior, white and blue-collar crime, but in focusing on the youth, the very young, from birth, if not before. Not when they are pre-puberty or teenagers. I think it's too late by then. All significant research, all settled theory from my own investigation, is that in the etiology of crime and in child psychology, the factors that predispose to sociopathic behavior by youth, all these theories and research conclude that the largest single factor is the parent variable. I believe that there's a clear direct corollary, a clear causal relationship between the level of involvement of a parent's training and example in a child's life and his subsequent involvement in crime or his steering away from crime. So I believe that if the strategy to reduce crime is to be evidence-based, if it's to be research-grounded and driven by best practices, I want to submit that the parent and his role is indispensable, pure and simple. I believe, therefore, that we should introduce, starting immediately, if not sooner, parental education in schools. I believe that many parents would like to see their children do the right thing, but one cannot teach what he does not know. And many parents, if not most, do not know what it means to be a parent. Because, as I said earlier, one of the main functions of a parent is to guide his child in the correct way, to steer him away from crime. But it begins at birth, not when the child is already in the later stages of primary school or in secondary school. Okay. I believe that by that too late, the tree is already too far to be bent. Right. So, Mr. Petty and Mr. Saunders, I want to recommend that you continue to involve the parents as much as possible. Yes. But even before that, starting now, in schools, from grade 3 to 5th form, there should be a discrete, separate subject called parenting, which should be a part of the national curriculum. And when students learn what it means to be a parent, they will not only delay parenthood themselves, but when they do become parent, they'll be far more au fait with the dynamics of parenting, what it means to be a parent, and their children, as a result, would be informed as to the kind of route they should take, and that would result in better children and better society.
Thank you, caller. Point taken. Another caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon.
And good afternoon to Major
Stewart.
Major Stewart, yes.
Afternoon, sir.
And to Mr. Petty.
Good afternoon.
Permanent Secretary for
the Ministry of National Security.
Yeah, Ministry of National Security, yes. Mr. Petty, I want to commend you, and I want to commend Major Stewart. I don't know how you all get it done, but the crime was on a high, especially with the shooting and everything. And now that you all are doing a wonderful job, I want you all to continue to do what you got to do, because when I listen to other countries under the COVID lockdown, and I hear how people stoning, even neighbor in Dominica and St. Lucia, how the people down there going on. Police got to run from battle and stone. I believe that we people in here more civilized and everything, and the police, they are doing a wonderful job by the people and put on the mask, keeping the protocol, and I want to commend you all for that. And don't give up. Continue to do what you all got to do. Now, my little question to you all. Now, you got a lot of young men here in the Federation, just going up and down and doing nothing. Sometimes men are encourage them why they don't go in the police force, why they don't go in the army. You understand? That is something good for you all. And I believe that you all from the community and go in, and your friends them stay in the police force or stay in the army. You know, the crime rate will drop a lot because they know that you all come from there. And these are young men who got something they do in school alone. So I do not know whether they can go in the police force or go in the army. So I want to ask you all the question: what you all could do for these young men to join the army or join the police force? Instead of that, I'm not against foreigners coming in, but what I meant to understand, a lot of foreigners now coming in from Jamaica, coming in from Guyana and different countries, I'm not against it really, and joining the police force when our young man here could have take part and join the police force too. So I'll just give me a little input on that, please.
Right, thank you so much for your input. Okay. Mr. Petty, you would like to comment?
Well, I'll comment, and let me say that I thank the caller about the parents. I mean, that is a critical part of the explore. It's work in progress, I have to say, because it's not easy.
Right.
To be honest. Right. But we're trying very hard to get parents on the committees, but even if they're not on the committees, to interact with the leadership, the police leadership, and so on. The part about parental education in school is not really my thing, because I don't know if it should be a subject.
Yeah.
I think the concepts and so on could be taught in whatever way we want to.
Yeah, but children are children. I don't know if you should introduce to them parenting material.
I don't think the caller would think about the physical aspect.
Not the physical aspect of it, but I mean,
of relationship, getting on with people, and
they used to have something when I was going to school, but it wasn't so much in primary school. It was in high school. They used to call it family life. Remember that, Mr. Petty?
well,
family life.
Go ahead
Yeah.
and family life.
Yeah,
I'm not saying
We should cover under that.
There are
Should cover under that.
talking
there are
about more
programs
from
in the schools that can
Yeah.
incorporate aspects
Yeah,
of parenting. I will leave that really to the curriculum
yes,
educators and so
yes.
on, even though I used to be there, but
Right.
I don't want to go down that road. But I'm just saying that this strategy and what we're doing in Explorers and I'm sure others out there are trying to do, parents will have to be or will continue to be a focus, and there are different ways of getting involved. In terms of the second caller about getting people to join the police force, one of the things that the community policing team through inspector has done is we have the cadets, and one of the things that we have introduced is to say to people, if you're interested in joining the defense force, for example, or the police, join our cadets, and we would try to see if we get you into there. Now, that is part of the discussion.
Mr. Petty, put a pin there. We have a caller. Working for you, good afternoon.
Yes, Mr. Williams, good day.
Good day.
A retired police speaking.
Yes.
I was hoping that they would talk about something about what the man from Canada has do, what positive came out of his tour of duty.
Are you saying the man from Canada?
Yeah, the man from down the south now. So,
Shaitan.
yeah, I couldn't remember his name.
Shaitan, yes. Neil Shaitan.
Yeah. I was wondering what positive came out of that. Another thing, I was hoping that the community police would continue to go around in the community and talk to the elderly and the adults. The started in my area, it did once, and our community really embraced them. It is true that children should be looked after, but the adults out there, they are, with this COVID thing, some people are depressed, lonely, and they need people to interact with. And the police, to me, is standoffish. They need to turn down the glass when they're driving through communities. You know, they're just passing through, driving fast. Even trying to stop them, they ain't stopping. And they need to interact with the public.
Okay.
Well,
Okay, thank you so much for your call.
anybody else?
No.
Let me just, I'll talk on those two quickly, but I'm just saying the Explorers Cadets we are trying to get some of the older children just about ready to leave school, even though some 12, 13, to join the Cadets Explorers and to say to them, if you're interested in joining the police or the defense force or even immigration or wherever, we would, as a matter of fact, we have a camp coming up in April where we're going to try to get speakers into them. The thing is though that we have to change or get that buy-in from the police. That once they come to the cadets and they say they're interested in joining the police, they do get a job. So those are discussions which under the strategy have to take place. But the caller is right, because we need to find ways of attracting more local youth into our national security organization.
Yeah.
With respect to Dr. Chaitan, he came and I think he did a good job. There was some limitations in terms of how much he could do, but he did have some good interaction with youth and with especially troubled youth. But he was on a contract which ended, and at some point we have to move on from there. But he would have done his best in terms of
Yes.
starting some of the discussions, at least with gang members and so on. But his main thing was interacting with troubled youth and families and so on. The part about the community policing, talking with parents, that is being done. The thing is, maybe they can't be there every day, but I do know that the team interact with the elderly, There's always more can be done, but right now we have 14 clubs in St Kitts, or 13. There's nearly 1,400 children. And so you have to balance your time. And so, but the point is right that there should be continued interaction with the elderly and with businesses and so on, the general community, which is being done. And perhaps more police can get involved in that type of interaction. But the caller is right, we need to get more local people interested, and I believe through programs like the Explorers and others, we can get them. And now the idea is, when we do get them interested, they're employed.
You know that building of relationship, Mr. Petty, is extremely important, because it has been shown that the influence that certain professionals have on the younger people influence them to take a particular course in life. For example, if you know a policeman who you admire, you respect, and so on, you might say, well, I want to be like Officer so-and-so when I grow up. And that really has to do a lot with the example which is shown by certain professionals, and so whether it be police or the nurse or doctors or whomever, that people really want to follow their example. And I think the point of that the caller was making in terms of that building of relationships, which the community policing brings about, because then people get to know the police, they get to realize, well, look, they're not just there to lock me up. They're people just like me. They're whatever I can relate to them, and oh, I would like to be a police one day.
Some time ago, I told somebody, when I was growing up in 1980, 1990, when you see a police coming, you run and hide on your people.
Right.
Now when the community police team go into a village, children are running from all over coming to them.
That is good.
The fear of police has gone, and people are beginning, the children are beginning to actually like the police.
Right, and you want the you don't want the fear of police. What you want is the fear of crime.
Fear of crime, exactly.
You see?
So.
And is there any possibility, for example, or has there any thought been given to, example, young people enlisting for national service? You know, in some countries they go for a year and things like that.
Well, I don't know.
Good afternoon, working for you.
Yeah, good afternoon, that's why.
Good afternoon, Jam Down.
We're watching, you know. I want to say something to the national security, you know, because from what I see in the policing on the road, it's terrible. You are telling us now that when you go in the communities, you see the children running to police. That is so true. You see that? But when you see things happening in the society and you call police on the spot, they're telling you about the station. And that is a call to the people. And that, I don't want to know if it's that the St Kitts and Nevis Royal Police Force come to, you know. Serious crime taking place in town, and you call the police on foot and he tell you about the station. Don't tell me. You walk up the station, by the time you come back, the crime don't commit and they're gone. And that is policing. And drag the government money, and that is good, and don't say nothing. Like, one time I call in policing with you, want to tell me a bash police. When we come back, all of them, you know. Once we're coming up to where we know it used to be, we come back them. Mm-hmm. That's why I have a good day.
Thank you, John Down.
The director, the general, you're doing a great job. And don't care what they say.
Yes.
You're doing a great job, because half of them who talking, they can't match you. They can't pull out your shoes. So you don't take them on. And Mr. Petty is experienced. So I don't study them. Just do what I have to do.
All right, John Down.
Support from police in the community, them. When you see things that you call them, they're telling you about, oh, go on the station. When you never go on the station, it's Hanley and all them boys, you know.
Right, John Down. Okay.
They deal with it on the spot. And that's
Okay.
what we want from the police them.
Right. Thank you so much, Jam Down. Thank
Continue to
you.
listen.
Okay.
Well, you know,
What I would say, thank you very much for the observations. What I would say is that the strategy does in fact address some of the needs that you have identified where the police are concerned, and that is something that we are definitely going to be working on as far as trying to actually build out a proper or better service of policing throughout the Federation.
Right. I suppose that, like everything else, Mr. Petty, you have people who are in a profession and you have different levels of commitment. You have different levels of people being enthusiastic, passionate in terms of what they do, and so on. You're not going to have all of them the same, because I'm sure that you can't make a generalization based on one or two police officers. You know, because most of them basically might be passionate. You may have one or two of them who are lackluster. They're just doing it and they see it as a job, and for them it's something mundane and so on. And some of them, all they talk about is the pay and all that sort of a thing. But are they really passionate? Is it a vocation?
well, I agree. As I said, I know what Jam Down said happens sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I would hope it happens too often.
Right.
I think they are very good police, as you say, and there's someone not so good. So let's hope that the majority would fall in the good category.
Yeah, as in everything you would have.
I believe that the idea of police community relationships is getting better now than it was a few months ago, a few years ago.
And I agree with you, Mr. Petty. We have another call. Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I am Carlton DuPont.
Mr. DuPont, welcome.
I want to ask something first of all. The gentleman's voice that I'm hearing is Stuart Saunders?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, I want to meet him personally when he gets a chance. My number is 6610037. This is why I want to meet him. Having lived here all my life, I am 60 years. And in my humble opinion, the police force has improved drastically. And I went to the police station the other day to find out about this same gentleman, and they told me he's not definitely working with just police alone. He's to do with national security. Well, I believe his involvement in this country has made a superb difference. And I have been doing some experiment in St Kitts, driving the streets 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, all over. And I have seen the presence of police in this country, and I tell you the truth, my heart is filled with joy. I am going to ask the people of St Kitts and Nevis, even if you have differences in opinions and ideas and you're frustrated with the police force, I am begging the people of this country, please, let us go to the relevant authority when we have complaints, but let us don't bash the police force as if the police force is 1 or 2 police officers that you might have had problems with. And Mr. Saunders, I don't know you, sir, but I am a disgusting man, but I'm looking forward to meet you personally. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. DuPont.
Thank you, Mr. DuPont. I'm sure we'll meet one day.
Mr. Petty, you were saying something before the call came in. No?
Well, in a sense, I was saying...
Oh, the national service. I had asked about the national service.
Yeah,
and people enlisting in something like that. At least for a year.
I think we have the youth department volunteers, and then they do national service.
They do. They clean up of beaches and so on.
One of the things, though, that we have in mind for people in the pre-child diversion type program is national service. And that's one of the activities which we intend, once they come to explore, to do.
Yeah. And that thing that the government introduced, Mr. Petty, since it came to power, the National Service Day, I think
Oh,
is a
that's
good
good.
thing.
Clean up.
The clean up, when you clean up your communities and so on, all those things are positive things
Yes.
that get people to really
Yes.
value their community, build relationships.
together.
Because at the end of it, that is what it's about.
Precisely. Yeah.
You know, you want people to come together.
Yeah.
And the gang thing, Major Stewart, is the opposite of that, because it speaks about division
Yeah.
and turfdom and all of that
Which is
sort
what you
of a
want to
thing.
eradicate. You want to.
Which you want to eradicate. You want people to come together.
Yes, definitely.
Is there anything that you wanted to say based on the callers?
Well, I think we had some interesting comments and questions this afternoon. A lot of what was said is actually addressed in the national security strategy. So from that perspective, I'm happy to see that at least it is not anything that is divorced from the thoughts of the people.
Right.
So, to
So you
speak.
have had
Yeah.
vast experience, Major General, working in Jamaica at the highest levels of national security and so on. Now, how do you think a government should go about prioritizing the resources? Because you spoke about the resources which are, which are so necessary
Yes.
in this national security, the whole architecture. How does a government go about prioritizing the resources to fight crime, to protect national security?
No, it's a very difficult question you have posed. Let's try and tell you something. It's a very difficult question. Not only for me to answer, but for the government itself,
Yes.
or any government for that matter. But I think that what is important is perhaps what is reflected right here in this strategy and on the cover of the strategy. Right? Because what it says to me is that the government is making every effort to ensure that the future of the nation is actually well protected, right? And the future of the nation is reflected in the youth of the nation, which is quite aptly shown on the cover of the document.
Yeah.
So once you have that particular aspect at the forefront of one's mind, then whatever threat bases that you have, right, as I've outlined, the various threat, and you make sure that you allocate the resources to ensure that the future will survive.
Yes, and Mr. Petty, as PS, what would you say in terms of the allocation of resources to the Ministry of National Security? Is it sufficient? Is it basically meeting the needs or demands of national security? What do you think? What is your opinion on that?
Well, there's always room for more, I think one of the things we have to do is prioritize. Certainly, I would like to see some more resources go into social interventions, to be honest. The problem with social interventions is that it's not something like buying a car, which you could see. And so I buy 10 cars. The effects of those are medium, long term, or longer term. So from my personal point of view, I would like to see a bit more effort go into that. But generally speaking, I think quite a lot of money has been put into national security.
I think most money goes to national security in the budget.
No, the most goes to education.
Yeah.
To education.
Yes. But national security gets its fair share. But working with what we have, we would want to prioritize, and as I said, there's always room for more. I think vehicles sometimes is the most challenging. But once ago, police used to walk on foot more.
Yes.
They don't do that very often.
Or bicycling.
It's more dangerous now to do it now than once ago. With all the guns we have around the place, once ago police used to walk in darkness and they were quite comfortable. Nowadays you can't be too sure. But training is important. So we probably need some more assistance in training, especially to deal with some of these matters like cybercrime and
Right.
transnational crime. The people out there are very sophisticated. So
Do you think that we need to use the technology more in terms of our national security architecture?
well, there's an area in policing which I think needs some, which we need to look at, and under this strategy I hope we can, is forensics. I think the forensics section of the police needs some work. Of course, all I know about forensics is what I see on TV.
We have a lab though in Tabernacle
We have a
Forensic.
lab. But I think forensics is not just an ordinary police or police unit. I think people have to be people now have to specialize. When I see the lab, when I see the crime scene technicians in other spaces, there's one who is specialist in the microscope, and there's one who is
Yes.
specialist. We need to lift our forensics standards a bit, and perhaps resources, some more resources need to be put in that area. You know, so to answer your question, I think we have a lot. We get a lot for national security, but we need to look at some more for training and specialist areas in training. I think we need to put some more in youth engagement or national or social intervention, police led, and also forensics.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, we have the strategy, and it has received the blessings of the cabinet. Major General, where do we go from here?
Well, as we said earlier on, we have started the whole process of going into the organizational reviews. We also have to ensure that whilst we are conducting that aspect of it, that it has a much wider view from the public. The public must have a chance to read the document and understand it, so that they can see exactly the part that they are intended to play, in the whole of society concept. And once we have finished that, and the government has reviewed the submissions that come from the various entities, then I think that we'll have a far better society with people who understand what national security is all about and understand the part they are going to play in it. And once we have reached that particular level, I think we are bound to see a much more safe, secure, and stable environment going forward.
Right.
Yeah.
Mr. Petty, is there anything you want to say before we go?
Well, I just want to ask first of all, the government agencies, because we have to get to